Alright, this video is an introduction to the classification unit where you're pretty much working with the essential question, how are living things classified? We're working off the standard SB3, element B, examine the evolutionary basis of modern classification system. Alright, you're looking at a cladogram, which is a diagram that will pretty much show how closely related organisms are based on evolutionary history. So if you look down at the bottom, you see these nodes or hash marks, the horizontal bars right here where the cursor is. The bottom one is vertebrae, bony skeleton, four limbs, amniotic egg, and so on all the way up. These are the derived characteristics that were noticed in history or observed in history, during different time periods pretty much. So what a cladogram shows, and I guess the best way that I can kind of help you understand how to read it, is to look at, see these branches that branch off of this main stem right here? This main stem, there are different organisms that branch off or were derived, at different times, okay? And each organism that branches off from this main line above or after, these characteristics were observed, it says that they do have those characteristics. It's kind of how you read it. So if, like for instance, this shark, it branches off from this main stem after or before this vertebrae characteristic was observed. So if it's above this characteristic, it's saying that the shark does have a vertebrae, which is true. The shark does have a vertebrae. An example, if it branches off below a characteristic, it's saying that that animal derived before that characteristic was observed. So this shark was already discovered before they discovered the bony skeleton trait. I don't want to say trait, but the bony skeleton characteristic. So you see the shark stems off of this main branch below or before the bony skeleton characteristic is observed. So the shark does not have a bony skeleton. So that's how you would read it. If the organism or the branch stems off below a characteristic, it means they do not have that characteristic. If they stem off after the characteristic or above it, that means they do have the characteristic. All right. If you need more help with understanding these, you want to ask your instructor. The last thing is that the more characteristics in common that the organisms have, the more closely related they are. I'll give you one example of those. So this crocodile and this bird are very closely related because they share, and they share because they both stem off after all of these characteristics along this main stem. So they both share eggs with shells, they both have amniotic eggs, they both have four limbs, they both have bony skeletons, and they both have vertebrae. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things in common, which make them very closely related. All right. And this is just another cladogram for plants with the same thing pretty much. If the animal branches off after or above the characteristic, that means they do have it. If it branches off before or below a characteristic, then it does not have it. How are living things classified? That's classification pretty much. Classification is the grouping of information, objects, and organisms based on similarities. And down here are the 6 kingdoms that we talk about: Plantae, Animalia, fungi, protista, eubacteria, and archaeobacteria. How are living things classified? Taxonomy, that's the grouping and naming of organisms. Organisms are living things, as we should know. Taxonomy, again, is the grouping and naming of organisms. Carolus Linnaeus, was the scientist who developed the present method of classification. He classified organisms by their physical and structural similarities. Now scientists use evolutionary relationships to classify organisms. Organisms are named using a two-word system, which is their scientific names. Binomial nomenclature, that's the term. So the name of the actual naming system is called binomial nomenclature, which is that two-name naming system. So here are the rules for the binomial nomenclature. Scientific names are always italicized, which means they're written where they're kind of like slanted to the right. That's what italicized means, or underlined. Scientific names are Latin-based. Scientific names are made of two words. A genus name is the first word. It starts with a capital letter. The species name is the second word. It starts with a lowercase letter. Example down there, you have humans, that's our common name, humans, and our scientific name is Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens. That's the genus. That's the species name. So this right here is using the binomial nomenclature, which is our scientific name. Oops. All right. Organisms are classified, which means, basically organized, based on physical similarities. The example are homologous structures. Talked about that in evolution. Fossils are evidence that show common ancestry. Number 3, similarities in embryological stages. Examples, embryos of different species that pretty much have similar structures. Similarities in DNA and proteins. So basically, if you look at this little graph over here, it's kind of telling you that this is how things are classified. You have a real broad and more inclusive taxa up here, where it says kingdom, and then a little more narrow, a little more specific, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So as you go down, kind of like this little pyramid, the groups get smaller and smaller because they get more specific. Okay, so from largest group, kingdom, to the smallest group, species. That's pretty much how we categorize and group different organisms. All right, and this is Carolus Linnaeus. Linnaeus' system had 7 taxa, aka levels. Taxa is another word for saying levels. And it just says that taxon is the singular term for level or taxa. Taxa is the plural form. All right. Here is where we use a mnemonic. A mnemonic is pretty much it's a little strategy that you use in order to remember the sequence of several words or phrases. So you try to remember the sequence or the order of kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You create your own mnemonic, which will help you understand, or help you remember the order of these taxa right here. I've had people in the past say, I think, Keisha's phone case only fits Galaxy S4s. That was one that they use. And there's all kind that you could use. It doesn't matter really what you use as long as it starts with K, P, C, O, F, G, and S. The more classification levels two organisms have in common, the more closely related they are. We said this on the first, excuse the bell. All right, please excuse the bell. We said this on the first slide earlier when we were talking about the cladogram. The less classification levels two organisms have in common, the more distantly related they are. Okay? These are the 3 domains of life. Pretty much all living things fit somewhere in one of these 3 domains. And domains are more general or more broad or more inclusive, or, for lack of a better word, bigger than kingdoms. So the first one is bacteria, And they include these types over here, archaea and eukarya. Or sorry, eukarya. All right, and this is just addressing viruses, wondering if viruses are living or not. You have viruses, those T phages right there. They come down, they find a host cell, they pretty much dock and latch on, they insert their DNA, then their DNA goes in there, it forms, and then it reproduces, and then you have several different viruses all in your body or in the cell, in the body of that cell. Again, I'll let you see how they attack a cell or a host cell. This is absorption / docking. Entry or penetration and insertion. Synthesis of viral enzymes and components. And then assembly of virus from components. Then cell lysis and phage release. So then the cell breaks and releases those phages all throughout your body. And here's a nice chart you might want to take a picture of or pause the video and write it down. It pretty much tells you why viruses are not living based upon the characteristics of life that we learned about at the beginning of this, of the course. So, there's certain things that you have to have in order to, or the organism has to be able to do in order to be considered living. Has to be able to grow and develop, has to be made of cells, maintain homeostasis, has to be able to obtain and use energy, has to be able to reproduce. So those are several things that viruses cannot do, mainly because they need a host in order to do, basically in order to reproduce and make more of themselves, they needed a host cell in order to do it. So that's why they're not living. Thank you.